Welcome to the Gem Labs podcast. I'm your host, Gabor Farkas. In today's episode, with my guest, Jean-Christophe de Mestral, we tackle a pressing global challenge, meeting growing energy demands sustainably. As we strive to achieve the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, we face a stark reality. Our current path falls short, especially in energy and climate. Energy demand is set to surge considerably by 2050, intensifying environmental strain and worsening energy inequality. Millions, if not billions, still lack access to clean energy. Balancing this demand while cutting emissions is a monumental task, especially with fossil fuels dominating our energy mix. Can we power our world, address climate change, and make sustainable energy accessible for all? Let's explore the path forward. Jean-Christophe, thank you for having accepted my invitation. You are not only a physicist, you wear multiple hats. So in order to avoid forgetting anything important, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners?
Yes, thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Yes, I'm trained as a physicist. I studied in the UK. That was more to satisfy a curiosity about how things work in the world. And it has always been a passion, physics. But most of my career has been in finance. I was able to sometimes bridge the gap between physics and finance by working on specific topics like artificial intelligence, which was called machine learning in 1993 when I started. So I spent about 15 years working on that with slow computers at the time. It was quite a task. And I remained in the banking sector for part of my time. But I also worked as a board member in several industrial and other financial companies. And I joined also Transmutex 5 years ago as a member of the board. And later I also took the hat of a CFO.
So we will look at the global picture and then dive into what Transmutex does and how a book that you wrote contributed to Transmutex's perspective on energy issues. So how is the global energy demand expected to grow in the coming decades, and what are the primary drivers of this growth?
Let's first look at the primary drivers, and then we can go on to the growth rate. It is quite clear that the global south will be a very strong driver. Just this part of the world would like to have a better standard of living, and they really need energy for that. There is a clear link between energy consumption and GDP growth. That seems quite obvious. And we estimate there that energy consumption will increase by about 2% per year between now and 2050. By comparison, globally, the world will probably see an energy consumption increase between 0.1 and 0.7, meaning the global north will probably decrease. That's the expectation, at least. That's the main, I would say, of energy consumption. Have China, as usual, which would increase its energy consumption. Asian countries also, that will be quite strong. Most of them, if not all of these countries, don't have nuclear energy, for example. So they will have to build also facilities to that end. But of course, they use a lot of coal, oil, that will need to be replaced eventually.
So what are the current dominant energy sources in different parts of the world? it's evolving. So what are they? Can they sustainably meet the increasing demand?
Right now, obviously, most, I think, 80% of the energy comes from oil, coal, and gas. It just has been like that. Oil peaks been predicted for a number of years. It doesn't happen. So we don't know very much how this is working. We just go on like this so far because there is nothing else really to draw energy from. That's the present situation. Now, that's a huge part. It's quite interesting because if I remember correctly, it's the equivalent of about 133,000 terawatt hour, which corresponds to roughly 15,000 nuclear plants generating energy. And 15,000 is a lot of equivalents to convert into something, let's say, non-coal, non-oil, non-gas.
This is something renewable.
Yes, and this is huge. If we have this net zero target 2050, that's the order of magnitude that we have to replace between now and 2050. This is absolutely colossal. We don't really know how we're going to do that. We've set the target, but we're not sure exactly how to reach it. And energy sources that we use today, obviously at one point we will reach a peak. That seems pretty sure. And we will be forced to switch to something else if we don't do that before hitting this peak. And then you can also consider the fact that oil might be more precious for other things than simply burning and generating heat, for example. Yeah, that's where we are right now.
Maybe we can look at what are the renewable energy sources' main challenges and limitations in addressing maybe not climate change, or not just climate change, but the global energy demand. And maybe we also have to consider the hidden impact, environmental impact of these renewable energy sources.
That's a large topic, right? Okay, now renewable energy sources, I will start with hydraulic. This is dams and everything. This is probably one of the most perfect energy sources that we have. It's a nice cycle, water coming down, used for energy, for electricity, and then water coming up again. We're extremely lucky in Switzerland to have this energy source here. We're not alone, obviously, but it's really impressive. Well, we all know the environmental impact it has when you have to build a dam and flood an area fairly big. That's a limitation for the construction of future dams. Now, we have, of course, the solar and wind. They're qualified as intermittent energy sources. That's a bit of a problem globally because it's very hard to exploit these energy sources as standalone source because it's not that you need clearly a backup system when there is no wind and there is no sun. Traditionally, you can say, okay, you can pump up some water in the dam, which we do, which is nice. But it's not only that, but you could use also a battery, like very large batteries. We have early large-sized battery systems. It doesn't look extremely convincing, but you have also to integrate the cost of these batteries because the standalone cost is not the whole story when you're talking about wind energy or solar energy. Personally, what I find is that solar energy makes a lot of sense on a more local basis. I've seen buildings integrating solar panels and then for their own use and then injecting the surplus in the grid, and that's perfect. I think that's a great idea. It works, it's fine. And then you can eventually add some batteries depending on the cost, again locally, to make sure that when you need electricity, you will have it internally, and what you send back to the grid actually will be minimal. So that's fine. But on countrywide scale, I think this is getting a bit more complex to do that because of the distribution grid. That's the difference between locality and the country system. The grid might also, under certain circumstances, become unstable. So it's the same thing with wind. Again, you need storage. And wind is a bit more tricky in the sense that you can have a long period of time without wind. I don't know, in 2000 or something like that, in Germany, there's been a period of 40 days without wind.
40?
Yes, in a row.
Wow.
That creates a big problem because you can have reserves, you can have water reserves, but that will last one day at the most. They're here just to regulate the normal thing. So when you have more than 4, 5, 6, 7 days without wind, that becomes a huge problem. So again, you need a backup. What is the backup? When all the dams are empty, you need maybe gas system. But that's a problem because you're not supposed to use gas in that. And then maybe batteries. Yeah, but technology is not sufficiently safe and efficient right now. It might become safe and efficient, I don't know. But on top of that, you have to ask yourself, what's the price of the kilowatt hour? Down the line, what are we going to pay? And for me, this is a very important question because even the legislator here in Switzerland is quite clear. We need to have an affordable energy, one way or another. The reason is, if we don't, countries around us will, or countries a bit further, China or others, will maintain a low price of energy. And we will lose a lot versus these countries. Industries, they just go away. In Germany, what is happening, it's the same thing right now.
When you said that Germany has had 40 days without wind, I couldn't help myself but think about the huge project Denmark has launched, building a wind farm island, producing huge amounts of energy. And faced with similar circumstances, although it would be in the middle of the ocean, so it might not happen the same way. But it could become problematic if countries surrounding the United Kingdom and the Netherlands and Germany and Denmark and other Scandinavian countries become to rely on the energy produced in this huge project.
Yes, I think also what we have to consider, let's say for wind, because the question is, okay, if there is no wind, maybe there is sun, so maybe they can be complementary in terms of energy, but easy calculation shows that it's not the case. Usually it goes together. Then maybe you can say in Europe, maybe if there is lots of wind in Spain, and not so windy in North Germany, that could compensate the exchange of energy. But it's not the case again. A friend of mine, Professor Egil Lillestøl, did a study at the time, and he could see that the correlation in terms of wind throughout Europe is at least 60%. So it's a global thing. If you don't have wind, okay, there is nothing to take energy from. So that's also a point to consider.
Everybody shoots for being energy independent. And there is one island in the Canary Islands, among the Canary Islands, that has achieved this, but it's a very small scale. So the island is El Hierro, I think, and they have both solar energy and hydraulic energy. So what they do is when they have sun, they pump up water into the mountain, and when there is no sun, they open the dam and produce the energy this way. So El Hierro is a very small island, so they can be energy independent. It's a very ingenious way of being independent, but it cannot scale.
Specific case, I would be interested to look into it. The key factor is what is the potential energy of the dam. Okay, let's say you have no sun and you use the dam exclusively to get the power. For how long can you use it? If it's 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 1 month, everything depends on that. It's not scalable because in the larger countries, even like Switzerland, I think we have let's assume that we don't have any nuclear system anymore. I guess we could have maybe a 1 day reserve, not much more than that. And Germany has even less hydraulic energy. And what they have, assuming they have, let's say, total electricity failure from other sources, I just seem to remember they would have something like 18 minutes reserve. The size does matter.
Well, how does dependence on fossil fuels affect energy security and geopolitical dynamics?
Well, it does. I mean, we just have to remember the oil shocks and the effect it had on our economies. So there's nothing really we can do. We're still spending a huge amount of fossil fuels here. Just look at the cars going by. And, this is just the way it is. So if prices go up, inflation goes up, you have less money for other things. It's durable enough, it reshapes industry. Again, in the 70s, that's when we got smaller cars, smaller engines. Okay, that was also an effect of the oil shocks. We were able to produce engines that needed a little gas. But this is, for the independence, of course, this is extremely important. Now, I think it's very difficult to imagine being really independent, even for Switzerland. The idea of having solar panels in the Alps, it doesn't allow us to be really independent. But for the rest, there's nothing much we can do. Even geothermal energy is not really scalable from our perspective. We tried a few projects, remember, Basel, another one in Valais. They didn't work. Basel because of an earthquake, and even close to here, Vinzel, we had also a geothermal project which was quite ambitious and then reduced. I think it was like 6,000 meters drilling and then reduced to 2,000, and then we discovered that there was not enough water. So it's very hard. You're always gambling in these kind of energies.
So it appears to be self-evident, but we can maybe look at the potential consequences of energy supply disruptions or price volatility on global economies and societies. You mentioned if Germany has only 18 minutes of independence, because that's the amount of energy they can store, they are contributing to the European economy with their factories and in other ways. So if there is no energy, everything stops.
Yes, so you can also look at the Ukraine conflict. Obviously, this had an effect on us. First, Switzerland and the increase of the price of the gas. Lots of people heating their homes with gas are paying a lot more. We're not talking 10% or inflation, simply, it's a lot more. Germany, that's exactly the same thing. They're quite heavy on industry, so that's also a big problem. Nord Stream 2 has been blown up. Again, that's, it's a kind of disruption. It was not active, but was ready to be active. And now, okay, that's over. And reducing the amount of imported gas forced the Germans to buy the American gas, which they provided, but not at the same price. It has a strong effect. And Germany is not in an easy situation from the economic point of view right now. And you can see the car makers, among others, do have some problems. Lots of them stopped the electric vehicle programs. So just to take this example, yes, it has a tremendous effect.
We have to ask how we can ensure affordable and reliable energy access for all, particularly in developing countries and remote regions.
Yes, Okay, that depends also on the concerned countries. Just we can think about African countries. Now, we've been in contact with some of them, and a few years ago, they started to think about energy. But again, to get out of poverty, to increase their standard of living, which is absolutely fair and just. So some of them have been thinking about the nuclear program. Okay, so they develop a nuclear strategy and say, okay, that's what we need. So they began to set up, let's say, a nuclear institute for their university and train people, and it's a long-term program. Obviously, they will use what is available right now, like solar energy, not deployed countrywide, but more locally. That's something they do. But we're more in contact with them regarding a possible nuclear future, because options have increased, actually, in this sector.
What are the main challenges and opportunities in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, number 7, affordable and clean energy?
Clean, I think we all have a pretty good idea of what it means. Affordable, that's a different topic, because this is going to be very difficult. Clean, we think about solar or heat pumps, geothermal, wind, that's quite clear. And from the nuclear side, we have the evolution of the technology right now, which will help. That we are, nuclear systems are divided in generations. One were prototypes, the generation 2 is most of the current systems that we have right now. Out of the 440 nuclear plants in the world, at least 400 are Gen 2. Gen 3, 3+, this is what is being built right now, and Gen 4 is coming. And Gen 4 is very interesting for that. I should not forget to mention fusion also, because I was talking about fission until now, but fusion also is an interesting prospect. We don't know if we're going to succeed to produce fusion. It's not an energy that we naturally have on the planet. Fission, in a sense, we do. It happens in nature from time to time, spontaneously, but not fusion. This is a much more difficult thing. But if we succeed, that would be great, because we have a pretty much infinite fuel reserve. And that could be, I think that could be really fantastic. I was to have this perspective of having for 50,000 years of fuel reserve. This is really fantastic. Now, that for the clean energy, and then there are other solutions that can be used. I don't know much about wave energy. The human being is quite creative in that sense. And that's what I like. It's really have some ideas. Tide energy. So I hear a lot about these projects. Hydrogen production. Hydrogen is not an energy source. It's a carrier, actually. But again, it would integrate a chain of energy, which also could be useful. Affordability, again, for hydrogen, for example, this is a tough path, really, because most of the large-scale project I heard about, also that came with the comment that we can do it, but it's just 10 times the price of a substitute.
Yes, hydrogen is a very interesting prospect. There's a lot of research going on in that field. There's a solid state hydrogen where it's stored into I don't know how to describe it. It looks like a piece of metal. And then you provoke a reaction to get the hydrogen out. And there's also the Fraunhofer Institute that's developed something called power paste, where you mix water with the paste within an engine to produce the hydrogen that is needed to create the energy. So those have the advantages of not having to have a bomb on board of your vehicle with the compressed hydrogen. But we have to yet see progress in these fields where they can be commercialized and applied to production of cars or other systems. We are talking about renewable sources, and many of them are intermittent. So there is a challenge in integrating those intermittent renewable energy sources into the power grid. What are they?
I think the biggest challenge of integrating these sources in the grid is linked to the fact that it's very difficult to match production and demand at that stage. Normally, if the grid is to be balanced and the frequency of 50 hertz of the grid is to be properly maintained, you have to produce what is necessary at any given time. Now, if you can't do that because all wind and solar are injecting in the grid their production because you have, let's say, high wind and lots of sun at the same time, which can happen, that will destabilize the grid. And it's reflected on the frequency of the grid. Mm-hmm. And it is very important because that could cause blackouts, large-scale blackouts. That already happened. But it's also an effect on everything linked to the industry. You have electrical motors used in the industry that can be quite sensitive to the frequency. And as an example, also, you can take, let's say, any nuclear plant. And if the frequency changes by 1 hertz plus minus, people are getting a bit nervous. This goes above a certain threshold, then you will need to make an emergency stop of these plants, for example. Also, you can have in another industry, you can lose part of the production because of that. So it has a pretty strong effect on industrial systems. So that's why it's a difficulty. You have to divert the energy, or of course you can use it and store it somewhere. But again, we're back to the storage problem. How much it's going to cost, how we're going to use that. Maybe it's already full. So what do you do if it's already full? So you need to lose this energy or stop the wind systems to decrease it. And even though for wind system it's more gradual, for solar system it can change very quickly. Mm-hmm. Just clouds coming above, you lose right away electricity. So that you need to adapt that. So that's one of the problems integrating in the grid.
How can we improve energy storage technologies to facilitate the wider adoption of renewables and enhance grid stability? And how much of a priority should that be?
Improving such system, again, we should trust human creativity in that sense. It's very important. We look at battery solutions. There might be other solutions. In the past, there have been many interesting solutions. Inertia wheel. You can have a gravitational well, huge size. There are a lot of simple ideas, but they're not so simple to use, to put in place, and to use. Now, I don't think we can really increase for the hydraulic storage. It is simple. Well, we just put water and that's it. That's quite simple. And the rest, I don't know. Creativity will tell you. Chemistry, maybe the lithium chemistry will evolve, or we will find a new combination which will be more interesting and cheaper for batteries. I have no idea. But research clearly should go into that direction. And after, everything boils down to, okay, how you integrate that and what is the cost going to be? It's always the same thing. Bottom line, what you and I are paying for the kilowatt hour, and the industry also. So in order to keep jobs here, to have a thriving economy, it's funny because you need energy to have a strong economy, but when the energy is too expensive, it kills the economy.
We are going to enter in a field that you are very familiar with. You've been talking a few times about nuclear energy, and this is your field. In 2011, you published a book titled L'Atome Vert. I don't know if it's been translated now. Our listeners will have to look for it. I don't know if it's still in print, but I've seen it on Amazon for $100. So, L'Atome Vert, the book introduces the concept of a second nuclear age before exploring what you mean by that. Let's explore the historical role of nuclear energy in energy production. What role does nuclear energy currently play in the global energy mix, and what are its advantages and disadvantages?
First, let me tell you that the price you saw on internet was not the original price, okay? Just to be clear about that. No, the nuclear energy globally as part of, I'm not talking about the electricity production, but the global energy consumption, has a fairly small role. Actually, it's about 3% maybe. Okay, that's not more than that. And I mentioned earlier that we had 440 nuclear plants. That's a bit less than 390 gigawatt of power. So it's not a huge source, but it has had its bad moments, obviously. Three Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, these were clearly disasters. But that of course, that belonged to generation two, and we can always discuss about that and find reasons for what happened and what should not have happened. But I think it does play an important role in a number of countries, like France, for example, which went nuclear early and fast. Really, they had this incredible program, and today they're helping other European countries. They can still export. When everything is working fine, they can still export electricity to maybe Germany, Switzerland, UK. I've read that in the last days that UK is importing a lot of energy also. So this is really a basis which is key, and it's a base load energy. Mm-hmm. This is different kind because that's really something we need. In terms of energy consumption, practically we don't go under a certain threshold. If you can have baseload up to that threshold, it's perfect. No questions. You will always use this energy for everything.
You said that nuclear energy is about 3% of energy production. That's worldwide. Obviously, in some countries like France that you mentioned, it's higher. It's more than 3%. And other countries in Scandinavia, I think Finland is the more reliant on nuclear energy. It's way higher. Which country has the highest reliance on nuclear energy?
That's a good question. I don't really have that information, but it's true that Finland has a lot of nuclear energy. Sweden, the same thing. Even though they closed a number of nuclear plants, now they decided to increase again. So they will have much more. Norway has a lot of hydraulic, so they don't have nuclear. And again, in Switzerland, that used to be also a big part of the electricity production. Now, worldwide, when you talk about electricity production, we're closer to 10% with nuclear. And I think France is above 50%, clearly. And that must be also the case in the Nordic countries, in Finland and Sweden, surely. But I can't think of any other country with a higher proportion. It's concentrated here.
Okay, so we're not going to be able to skip the problematic issue, and we have to look into how historical events shaped public perception of nuclear energy and what are the main safety concerns surrounding nuclear power.
Yes, the three accidents I mentioned earlier have had an extremely strong impact. It's quite impressive to look at the images and to see what happened. And even now, looking back at Chernobyl, the grainy films because of the radiations that were taken, it's quite impressive.
And the most dangerous substance,
thorium, exactly. And it is true that maybe we don't realize how close we were to an additional disaster in Chernobyl, when a group of soldiers were able to take water away from below the reactor. Because had the thorium touched the water, that would have been just a tenfold disaster.
Maybe we can stop quickly on corium because I'm not sure everybody knows what it is. What I read is that it's considered the most toxic substance on Earth. And
But you can imagine when the core of the reactor heats up so much that everything melts. When you have fuel assemblies which were neatly put in place with a proper distance among them, when everything melts and becomes a big mixture of all these elements, yes, probably it's the most toxic material on Earth. That's for sure. But it can be also very reactive, especially in contact with water. When you cool down this material, you could start a reaction, also a nuclear reaction. You don't want to have that. So yes, it's really problematic.
So what are the primary challenges associated with nuclear waste management and decommissioning of nuclear facilities?
I'll focus on let's say, normal waste, because corium is a very specific case. So waste, what is waste? Is that when you put fuel in the core of a reactor, fuel is a combination of two kinds of uranium. So we call them two isotopes. It's uranium-238 and uranium-235. So when you're looking in nature and try to find uranium, in its natural form, it comes in a very specific mix. 99.3% is uranium-238 and 0.7% is uranium-235. What is fissile? What can be used directly for energy production is the U-235. So we don't have much of it. And to be properly used, we have to increase this proportion in our reactors to, let's say, about 4 or 5%. That's the enrichment part. And then, when it's done, you put it in the core, and it begins to burn, quote unquote, because of neutrons flying around. What happens is that these neutrons actually will hit U-235 nucleus, and most of the time this energy will split the nucleus in two, what we call fission products, so lighter nuclei. So that's one part of the nuclear waste. Okay, that's the fission fragments. And that will be, in the end, we will have 4% of fission fragments in a fuel assembly. Now, that's not the only waste. The U-238, the 95%, is not inactive. What happens is that since the 238 is not fissile, or not easily, instead of having the neutron breaking up this nuclear, it will capture a neutron. Okay, so the nucleus will just slightly grow, and the radioactive profile of this element will change a little bit. It might become more radioactive, and then will decay in another element. Typically, the uranium-238 will become uranium-239 with one neutron captured, and this will eventually decay in plutonium-239. Okay, that happens in several steps, and you can have also plutonium-239 with which the same thing happens. So it will become plutonium-240 and then decays in something else. And you can have a number of heavier than uranium elements created. They're called transuranics. And these transuranics, like americium, curium, neptunium, are very problematic. They're hot, they're long-lived, high-level nuclear waste. And that's the second part of the nuclear waste. Okay? We really have to consider these two elements, first the fission fragments and then the transuranic as waste.
And how can we improve the sustainability of nuclear energy by addressing these challenges?
You have two ways. You want to avoid producing nuclear waste. And then the second path, which can be done at the same time, is that you want to destroy nuclear waste. To avoid producing these transuranics, there is one way that we know of, is the use of thorium instead of uranium. Okay, that's slightly different, but it's different nuclear fuel, but which has been known for a long time. You know, the idea dates back 1960, basically. And it's been tested a number of times. We know it works. We know the physics very well. So this is the way to reduce the production. The reason why it does not produce these transuranics is that it's lighter nucleus than uranium-238. Because the main culprit for transuranic is the uranium-238, clearly, because 239 to 40, 41, this is close enough. It does produce a lot, and this is, again, 95% of the fuel. Now, if you take, it's not 238, it's 232. Mm-hmm. It's a bit lighter, so it can capture, can become 233. I mean, it's expected as a fuel. It can also become 234, maybe 235, maybe 236. The probability that it reaches the transuranic level is almost nil. So it does not produce plutonium. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the strengths, actually, of thorium. So that's the first part. It's you use thorium so as to avoid producing this. And then for the second path, you have the transuranic. Okay, what do? You use, let's say, a special kind of machine to transmute them into lighter nuclei. Okay, so you take the plutonium, americium, curium, blah blah, and you bombard them with high energy neutrons. And what you do is you force fission, where these nuclei are not easily fissionable. What you do is you force fission, and then you create fission fragments. And the fission fragments stabilize much faster. So the idea is, instead of having, let's say, 500,000 years until the radiation becomes low enough, it becomes maybe, 500, 800 years, maybe at the most, to stabilize these fission fragments.
So you mean we have to bombard them for 500 years?
No. You have to bombard them, and then they split right away, and then you extract these fission fragments, and you just let them rest for, say, 500 years, and then they will become harmless.
Okay, well, it's still 500 years. It's a long time, but it's way less than 500,000 years.
Oh, yeah, well, a couple of comments. Yes, it's a long time, but we know how to do that. We know how to store for 500 years. This is not a problem. We have plenty of houses that have been built 500 years ago. Mm-hmm. Plenty, maybe not. We know how to do that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, if you think about 500,000 years, it means 4 glacial ages. We have not the slightest idea of what can happen during a glacial cycle with geological repositories. When there is 1,000 meters of ice above, is it going to stay like that?
We have no idea.
We have no idea. Okay, we won't be there when that happens. Maybe, okay. But still, if you put it in perspective, 500,000 years, that's 4 cycles. Mm-hmm. It's just huge. Maybe you don't want to have that because it's too concentrated. And there are other problems. It's not very easy to identify a repository that will, even at our time scale, that will be good enough to hold that. Mistakes have been made in Europe too, in Germany, for example. We thought that the repository was identified properly, and then finally no. So you have to change everything. You have to make plans to take all the waste out and then put it somewhere else. So it's a very difficult thing. Whereas, okay, we say 500 years, we use cement, we know how to do that, that's for sure, but it's a different perspective.
Yes, I read that Finland just inaugurated a new storage facility to store all the waste that they are producing with the second and third generation nuclear plants. And they use a combination of a very deep under the ground storage with some sort of sealing sarcophagus. And there's an entire field dedicated to how we're going to communicate that there is something very dangerous stored in this place. Because thinking about how we're going to talk to people who will come in 200 or 300,000 years from now is a very interesting challenge. But hopefully the new technologies will allow us to use up all the existing nuclear waste and turn it into something that's more manageable.
That's the idea. The Finland case is very interesting. You have to realize that's the only deep geological repository existing in the world. And it's only for their own nuclear plants. So it's very limited. And this is something to consider also in the United States. All waste from commercial nuclear plants are stored next to the plant, above ground or barely above ground, just waiting for a solution. And this is clearly a risk. Everybody knows that it cannot remain. It cannot remain like that. Yes, the solution here for the existing waste is to separate the low to mid-level waste from the high-level waste and destroy the high-level waste. Then you can store the rest as, let's say, as low to mid-level waste, which is okay in the sense that it will be stabilized faster and will not pose a threat to the environment.
Maybe we can come back to that in a little while. Given the energy challenges we've discussed, have we explored all available options for low carbon, high density power generation?
I wish I knew.
So maybe look at the nuclear alternative that you know well. What nuclear energy alternative could address many of the concerns related to safety, waste management, and proliferation associated with conventional uranium-based reactors?
I mentioned fusion before, using hydrogen as a fuel, deuterium, tritium. Okay, that's an option, but we have no idea when this will be exploited or whether we can actually do it or not, but many projects are ongoing, so it's always an option. We tend to believe that it's always 30 or 50 years away. When I did my studies, it was the case. Today, it's still the case. All right, we don't know. If we want to address these points as safely as possible, nuclear fission with thorium remains, because I think this addresses the problems of the waste, non-proliferation, and safety at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's quite incredible. One of the early thorium researchers, Alvin Weinberg at Oak Ridge National Lab, he really thought of thorium as being the solution for humanity, as civilian systems. He fought all his life because he wanted the US government to promote thorium and to build nuclear plants using thorium. But he did not succeed for a number of reasons. But all these points, we just addressed the waste transportation that can be done. It's not with every system. You have to use what we call a subcritical system in order to most efficiently destroy this waste, transmute the waste. This is key. Any other system, you cannot load as much nuclear waste or high-level waste as would be required to have an effect globally. Then in terms of safety, now generation 4 and even the subcritical system, they rely mostly on passive safeties. It's even a condition for generation 4. And passive safeties are safeties based on the laws of physics, not on a system that has to be activated because of an emergency, just the laws of physics that prevents the core from overheating. There are several of these systems. It's a combination that is necessary. And non-proliferation, that's also a technological choice. As soon as you handle fissile material that potentially could be used as a weapon, but depending on the architecture of your system and depending on how you reprocess, you separate after used fuel, you can have a non-proliferant system as long as fissile material cannot be separated alone. It always comes mixed actually with other isotopes or other atoms. And all these 3 points can be today addressed with one system. That's basically the idea.
Your book, L'Atome Vert, focuses on thorium-based reactors as a safer and more sustainable alternative to current nuclear technology. You're now the president of the International Thorium Energy Committee. Please tell us about thorium, the element, and the role this Swiss-based association of physicists, engineers, politicians, and other like-minded people plays in developing thorium energy systems.
Sure. Well, thorium is an element in the Mendeleev table. It's a metal belonging to the family of actinides. It's a gray metal which oxidizes quite quickly. It's lightly radioactive. You can measure it by its half-life. The half-life of thorium is about 14 billion years. So, it's not very active, I would say. And it has so far very little industrial use, used maybe in quality optics, a few things like that. Right now, it's not a sought-after element, really. It's found together with rare earth, and when rare earths are very important and used, usually thorium is separated and put aside until further good idea of use. That's what is happening with this metal. And the International Thorium Energy Committee, this is how it worked. And this is partially a personal story because in 2011, following Fukushima, Germany took the decision to stop nuclear, and then the discussion was also ongoing here in Switzerland in the Swiss Parliament. I listened to these discussions and I was a bit surprised that for me an obvious solution was never discussed. It means the use of thorium, or at least do some research or develop thorium systems. And so I wrote an article for Le Temps where I just mentioned that. I say there is an option and so on. And with two effects, two consequences. The first one was an editor calling me to write the book. When an editor comes, you just say yes. And it was a great adventure. It was really fantastic. So I was a bit under pressure, but I had little time to write it. But okay, just take up the challenge and then you just do it. And I think I was happy with the result. And the second effect was I got a call from a retired engineer from CERN. And he said, we're a bit surprised that someone knows about this technology, this approach. We are a group at CERN who worked with Carlo Rubbia on thorium systems. Would you like to meet us? I said, sure, no problem. So I met the group and they were kind enough to accept me in. And they were mostly engineers, physicists from CERN. We met regularly at CERN and it was really nice. And in 2012, we thought it would be a good idea to create an association, to have kind of basis. And we created ITEC, International Thorium Energy Committee. Jean-Pierre Révol, Dr. Révol, was the first president. He did really a fantastic job. And in 2013, I organized a thorium conference at CERN called THEC Tech 13. It was very successful. We had, I think, 200 people coming from all over the world just to have, an assessment of the existing technologies, what was going on with thorium systems. It was really focused on thorium. And then that it took a while because we did quite a few things afterwards, after this conference. We discussed also a lot of things. We always were thinking of how to bring Carlo Rubia's idea in the open, or to realize it, to create it. We had contacts with different institutes, and so one of the objectives was really to create a company to do that. Transmutex is really the result, because that's, I think it was 2017, I think, when Franklin Servan-Schreiber joined Tech. He was the right person to say, okay, let's do it. And so we discussed also with him, and we agreed that we should go ahead. And so that's when Transmutex was created. And now eTech is really into communication. That's the idea, is to maybe organize conferences, presentations about thorium, anything linked to thorium, really.
What are the main challenges and research priorities in developing and deploying thorium-based nuclear plants, and how can international collaboration help advance this technology?
The first one is that it's not a deployed technology. When you have to license it, because it's in a highly regulated environment, you need to go through all checks and controls and everything, and you have to license it, let's say, through the NRC, the National Regulatory Commission in the United States, and so it has to be accepted one way or another. So that's difficult, because it's also based on a lot of simulations. So we need data, we need numbers about how the thorium behaves in certain situations, how the fuel bar will behave under irradiation, how the thorium pellet itself inside, how it behaves in time, because it gives off energy, it heats a lot, and then what happens is it's swelling a lot, not too much, and so on. So the certification is just something really colossal. And the fact that there is no path right now existing, that's a problem, because we have to create this path.
But there are also different ways of using thorium. You were talking of rods or pellets, but there's the molten salt technology, which was developed in Oak Ridge in the 50s. And I think this is the technology on which the plant that is being built or has been built in China, in the Gobi Desert, that it's relying on. So what are the different ways of developing a nuclear reactor based on thorium?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, again, there are, I described three basic ways, but there are combinations of these, so it's not the only way. Now, I described the molten salt, where you have a kind of salt, not table salt, but FLiBe, sorry, I know in French, fluorure de lithium et beryllium. And what you do is actually you dissolve the thorium, sugar in the tea, in the molten salt. And this acts as the coolant and the fuel at the same time. Okay, so that was the original approach of Albin Weinberg. The thing is that in the salt, when reactions happen, fission reactions happen, so the salt loads up with the fission fragments. Okay, that's the result of the fission. And at one point, you have to clean the salt. So the option is to have it taken through externally through a unit that will clean the salt, and that will recuperate just a few elements and then send it back into the core. There are some challenges here. First, the salt is extremely corrosive. Then separation, the online separation system is difficult to make. So we don't know, as of today, if there is a solution. So the Chinese reactor, we believe, is actually working. We're not sure that it has such a system, because it's a low power, and would not have the same problems. But if you do a large power system, yeah, it can be a problem. Second solution is the one that we use. It's the what we call accelerator-driven system. It's a combination of particle accelerator with a subcritical reactor, meaning that the reactor cannot sustain by itself a nuclear chain reaction. So without the accelerator, without the beam, everything stops in the reactor, which is a safety measure, because if you have a complete loss of power and you lose the beam, everything stops. That's it. If you have an earthquake and the beam moves slightly and is off center, okay, that it stops right away. So this is a very strong passive safety system. And this one is cooled by lead, which has also its problems because of corrosion. Lead is quite corrosive. But the temperature that we use is a bit lower than for molten salt, so it's easier to handle that problem. And the third system is called pebble bed reactor. It's tennis ball sized fuel containing, it has a lot of little thorium elements in these balls, and then okay, you put everything in a big cylinder, and then you let some helium gas go through, and it heats the helium gas, and then that's basically how it works. We had a prototype in Germany in the 80s, which worked for 4 years using this system. So it worked fine. There was just one problem, actually, because there was a blockage in the admission of these balls. And the scientists tried to use some kind of lever to unblock, and I think it destroyed one of these spheres. And okay, that was a bad thing for the program.
I can imagine. I read that thorium produces 100 times less waste than uranium and other fuel. But still, we can explore what are the safety issues associated with thorium, both in terms of radioactivity, leaking out, and weapon production.
This is a part of the licensing process, okay? We have to imagine every possible accident, say, okay, what are we going to do against that in terms of a reactor concept or processes? Each system is a bit different. The molten salt, you can say, hey, well, we can have a leak. The pipe coming out of the reactor to the cleaning unit can break down. Okay, what is happening in that case? Obviously, you would have the molten salt, the hot molten salt, go down on the floor, and then if it touches the floor, it gets flat because it's liquid, so it quickly solidifies. But if it's flat, you will not have fission reactions anymore because the geometry does not allow that. So, okay, so that's one of the things that can happen. One common characteristic between molten salt and the accelerator-driven system is that they work at close to atmospheric pressure inside the reactor. You know that the nuclear reactor using water as a coolant need to be under pressure so as to avoid
depending boiling up.
Yeah, boiling up. You have a boiling water reactor that does exist, but it is also under pressure because you don't want it to boil too much. Okay,
because but the accumulation of steam that creates pressure.
Yes. But basically the idea is that you want to avoid water to boil. And you have a pressure, it can be anywhere between 70 and 140 bars, times the atmospheric pressure, which is very high. And that creates a problem. Fukushima was clearly such a system. And when you use water, also, if the temperature of the cladding of the fuel assembly is too high, you will generate hydrogen, or you will separate hydrogen and oxygen in the water. And hydrogen would accumulate, and that's what we had in Fukushima. It was an explosion, a chemical explosion, due to the recombination of hydrogen and oxygen. So that's something that you cannot have with these systems.
Because there's
no water, simply.
Yes, you said lead, but there's another coolant that is used, is sodium-based.
Sodium is different, but it's also a possibility. We even considered using sodium, but sodium is so reactive with water and humidity in the air that we discarded that very quickly. But it was still an option. And it can be considered with thorium, maybe in other companies considering it. I don't know, but it's not for us. We thought that lead was better. We use lead for a very specific reason. It's that when neutrons are flying around in the lead, they keep their energy. They slow down very gradually in lead. Okay, that's because that's due to the fact that the neutrons, which are quite light, hit a very heavy nucleus, lead. So they just rebound and they keep more or less their energy. Whereas in the water, it's different because water molecules are much lighter, so neutrons lose their energy very quickly. But we need high energy in order to destroy the high-level nuclear waste. So that's why we chose this solution.
You were talking about the transformation of existing very dangerous nuclear waste. So there are Canadian companies that are working on transmuting and transforming these wastes. There are 3 Canadian companies specialized in that. You were talking about transmutation, and the name of the company is Transmutex. So you're the CFO of Transmutex. Maybe you can talk to us about what Transmutex does. Is it only transmutation, or if there are other projects in the pipeline?
Transmutex has the mission to design, engineer, and build a new class of nuclear reactor. That's the accelerator-driven system. And the function of this reactor is, of course, to produce energy. But it's the most efficient machine by far to transmute high-level waste, transuranics. And that's why we are working on that. So we are a mono-product company in that sense. But when you consider what it implies, actually, in Transmutex, you have several projects that we will need to bring together at one point to build the system. I mentioned the accelerator, the cyclotron, which will shoot the beam of protons into the heart of the reactor. And then the proton beam will be met by what we call the target, spallation target. That's a place where when the protons hit, you will have a great quantity of neutrons generated. And this is what is necessary for a subcritical reactor to go on. Okay, I mentioned that the reactor in itself cannot sustain a continuous chain reaction because it lacks actually the requested number of neutrons. So we bring them from the outside through the beam. So that's how it works. And so we integrate in the core high-level waste, and that's where it is transmuted, changed into fission fragments. So that's the second functionality of the reactor, okay? Energy production, waste transmutation. And there are other things that can be done. Obviously, we will be able to, let's say, produce some medical radioisotope. That's also a possibility in the core or through using the beam of the cyclotron. A few words maybe on the cyclotron. It's a technology that has been existing for 50 years. So it's not like we're inventing something totally new. All the different elements that we have to put in place, they all have been tested somewhere in the world. The cyclotron is the one at Paul Scherrer Institute, basically. We use the same technology. It's 50 years old. Okay, so we just make it a bit bigger.
Talking about size, you said size matter, but does it matter in everything? There's a company in the United States that's working on turnkey nuclear energy facilities that are meant to be built in 3 months and to provide energy to small or medium-sized factories or data centers and can be scaled by adding more. So they are relying on molten salt, I think, those technologies. And I've heard scientists saying that it's not a path that has a future because of the price to energy ratio. So the projects that you are working on, are they scalable with small plants that can be scaled to larger plants, or are you not there yet?
We have reasonable size, and it can be considered scalable because you can put 2, 3, 4 next to one another. So it's something that you can scale up. It's a modular system. We talk a lot about small modular reactor, but okay, that's a little bit the idea that could be done. And in the future, maybe we can have larger systems. What we aim to is a 600 megawatt thermal, so it's a 220 megawatt electric, so it's not very big. But again, what we want to do is to clean up the waste. Mm-hmm. This is very important to consider that. This is our most important goal, actually. And as a byproduct, we produce electricity and we sell it. The operator, the company operating this plant will sell it. That's what we want to do. And also, it's difficult to compare the company you mentioned. Maybe they have an interesting system. Some claim that they can put everything in a small container and then you put 5 containers. All good for them, but they're really in the idea of producing energy. Maybe we'll have to clean up after them, I don't know. Maybe they will use thorium, which is fine. This is not a problem. But what we're facing right now is that there is waste everywhere that needs to be taken care of. And there is an idea to increase nuclear systems in the world. COP28 said 3 times, and I think the IAEA is more modest, 2 times. But anyway, there is a strong increase, and most of the systems are uranium-based. So at one point, there is something that we have to do.
There is enough waste for you to produce energy for how long?
A long time. Again, it depends. Rhythm at which you will transmute waste depends on the number of systems existing. Mm-hmm. So it can take 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. But this, let's say, order of magnitude, it would be foolish to think that 500 years or 1,000 years would be useful. I don't think so. And then things change. During this period, we might find more interesting technologies, I don't know. But 50 years, yes, this is clearly a time horizon that we have.
There is likely to be a very strong resistance to introducing new nuclear-based energy production. How should this resistance be apprehended?
I think through communication. I'm really amazed when I talk with people in a non-nuclear context. I'm amazed at how they are stuck in the generation 2 vision. It's really, and I understand, they don't know how things have evolved, particularly because generation 3 and 3 plus are just evolutions of the Gen 2. It's safer, larger, more expensive, maybe more difficult to build. I mean, we know Flamanville, all these examples, it's quite expensive. Because of lack of communication, they don't realize what generation 4 is bringing, and it's really a change. It's entirely different. You have a different view of these systems, and with regard to safety, with regard to fuel, how it is used. I mean, you can imagine generation 2. What happens is that you take this fuel with 5% of 235. You put it in the core, then you take it out, and then it's waste. you store it somewhere. What you've done is that you've used only a few percentage points of this fuel, and then, okay, you put it somewhere in the dustbin. What should be done, ideally, and that's what we aim for, is that we want to close the cycle, meaning recycle what comes out. Mm-hmm. Typically, when you have this 95% U-238, that's good stuff. We separate that in a reprocessing unit, and that's what differentiates us from all other systems. It's the addition of the reprocessing unit. And then we make a new fuel rod out of what we took out. So what is left out is really just the 3-4% of fission fragments, and then the rest we used for a new bar. So we really want to close the cycle and to put it through the core several times. And this is how you can also make sure that from the environment perspective, you don't need to mine as much uranium as we do today, and we can reduce the impact of mining.
From an economical perspective, it's an interesting business model, because before you had to mine up the uranium in order to feed nuclear power plants. And are you going to be paid in order to recycle existing waste, and at the same time being paid for the energy you produce? Or will you have to buy the existing waste?
We don't know yet, because it's a bit early to say, but I think, of course, there is a political interest of having high-level waste destroyed. Yes, maybe we could be paid for that. It's possible. That will not be the main income of such a plant, but still, this is still the main function of it. What you have also to see is that, and that's an interesting point, when you use thorium, in itself does not fission. Okay, in the core it has to be transformed or transmuted actually into another element, which is uranium-233, which doesn't exist in nature because half-life is too short. And actually in this system, you can tune the system to make sure that it produces more U-233 than it consumes. And that can be used also in other nuclear plants. You can help. So there is no mining anymore in that case. If you produce 233 in an accelerator-driven system, what we call a START system, Transmutex. So if we produce that, and we can actually provide to other more conventional nuclear plants the necessary fissionable material. But we would provide it not as a fissionable material, but as a ready-to-use fuel, mixed with other elements.
I've seen graphs comparing the cost of producing energy based on nuclear fuel against renewable sources such as wind, such as hydraulics, and it strongly plays in favor of renewable sources. It's about half. So how viable can thorium-based energy producing power plants be?
These comparisons are quite interesting, but every time I see them, I have the same question. For wind, for example, do you consider the fact that it's an intermittent energy source? Otherwise, you're not comparing the same thing. You have to add the storage in order to, and then long term, quite sizable storage in order to begin to compare. And then I'm not sure that there will be a large difference in that case. And then when you're talking about the START system of Transmutex, we have to also put forward the fact that we have one additional thing that other nuclear plants do not have. That's the reprocessing unit. And the reprocessing can separate, we can make new fuel, we can vitrify, we can do many things actually in this unit. And this is an interesting technology that comes from Argonne National Lab. We worked quite a lot on it using thorium. and it's very successful. It's quite clean, actually. So it's very usable. So we have it on site because of non-proliferation reasons. Don't need to make any transportation between recycling or reprocessing, fabrication, and everything. So that's a big advantage. Of course, it's a bit more costly, but you have everything on site. So that's why comparisons are very difficult to. But even with this system complete, we believe that Start would be competitive in the electricity market.
To overcome the potential resistance of the population, you mentioned communication. Who should take on the challenge of overcoming this resistance of a potentially misinformed or even maybe deliberately misinformed population?
Politicians definitely should take the challenge because in the end, they make or they take decisions or they make proposals for the people to vote on, at least here. But this is important that they discuss this, they debate this together with specialists. I think it would be interesting for the media to organize also these debates. That's a strong communication channel, so it's very important to be able to discuss these things and to express it so that everybody can understand what this implies, what this means. If the energy begins to be too low, when we do presentation and explain the technology and say this can be done, and lots of people say, "Oh, we didn't know about that," and that's also the role of high-tech, really. But we're a small group of people. If anybody interested in joining us in order to do that, well, they're all welcome, obviously. But it's very important to do that and to pass on the message of what can be done. And then after that, we decide. But with high-tech, or similar, with the media and the politicians, I think we have a pretty good basis communicating about these new technologies.
We took a dive. I can't say it was a deep dive because it's such a broad topic that we can't address everything on an hour and a half conversation. It was a shallow dive. Maybe we'll get to talk more about this issue in a subsequent conversation. Before concluding, is there anything that we are not talking about but we should be?
Yes, there are many things. We should be talking about thorium a little bit more. We should be talking about what it means, what it really means to have set a 2050 target, a net zero target, because I don't think that people realize what it really means. And globally, to this question I mentioned earlier, but the economics of energy. What this implies, also for the citizens, but also globally for the country. When you look at a given country in the world, because all the decisions that we will take here will definitely have strong consequences here. So we need to discuss that further. This is something that is not often discussed.
So you said thorium as your first topic. So what should we talk about thorium? What is it that we haven't talked about, that I've missed? That what is important that we talk about regarding thorium?
I think to summarize is that it's a paradigm shift in nuclear, that basically the safety is not an issue anymore with passive safety. Non-proliferation is really also a non-question right now, and that nuclear waste also is something that we can really address very efficiently. And because this is one of the most common complaint I hear about nuclear waste, and then say that is something that we can really address. It's funny, but it's just a small anecdote. Social setting, when talking about nuclear with someone who obviously was against nuclear, and I asked him, say, okay, but why what's the reasons? Why are you against nuclear? And they said, oh, it's not safe and it produces a lot of waste, long time waste. We don't know what to do with it and so on. And I said, let's make a thought experiment. Let's imagine that there is a nuclear technology that is safe, that can be really shown safe, and that produce short-term and little volume of nuclear waste. What would you say? And he answered, oh, that doesn't exist. I said, okay, yes, but it's a thought experiment. What would you say? And he said, yeah, I would consider it. I said, fine. Yeah, we know how to do that.
So to conclude and maybe give us perspective, how soon, in how many years, do you expect to see the technology you're working on become real? The first plants come into activity? 10 years, 15 years, 5 years?
We hope 12 years.
12 years.
Yes.
And Europe or where?
It's still open. It's not that we haven't found a place. It's rather what would be the best suited place. So there is a choice. There are several, actually, options. So I can't say right now where, but we're still considering a few options.
Looking forward to a future conversation about the developments of this technology. Thank you for your time for today.
Thank you very much, Gabor.